Hey folks, welcome to the new surroundings for the Retro Rides stuff, videos and all that kind of business. Whilst I was moving all this around and getting things ready, I was moving various boxes and all of that kind of thing, and I came across a couple of very interesting things. Firstly, came across this. This is the original RetroRides.com, back when we had a .com, flyer. And we had 1,000 of those printed, and we took them to the Retro Cars show, which was in association with Retro Cars magazine way back when. And that was it. That was our advertising. That's all we've ever really done. And I really should probably do some more. But alongside that was this, and I thought the new surroundings for our show, for want of a better term, would be a perfect time to discuss the origins of the best retro car show that you probably didn't go to. Probably. Let me describe an event for you. It's over 2 days. It's at a major UK circuit. The public are taking their cars around the track on the Saturday. There's camping. There's guest cars of an international variety. There's club displays. There's retro parking. There's all sorts of interesting stuff there that you probably don't see elsewhere. And sound like anything familiar? Sound like Retro Rides Weekender? Or even Tracked at Silverstone? Or Japfest even, back when it was at Coombe? Or as it is now at Silverstone? Yeah, it could be any of those. But what it is it's the Retro Ride show. So let's do a little bit of history here. So in 2003, Retro Cars magazine launches, and we're often confused with Retro Cars magazine back then, but Retro Cars magazine existed before Retro Rides. It predates us. There was another retro magazine that was like, I think, a weird pullout with something, or they may even had a couple of issues. I can't remember the exact history of that thing, but the retro scene, as it is now, starts with Retro Cars magazine, essentially. It kind of floated around in different pieces. A little bit of Street Machine here, a little bit of Fast Car magazine there, in classic car magazines, even in car and car conversions. Like the retro scene was brought together by the ideas and content of Retro Cars magazine in 2003. 2004, February of 2004, Retro Ride starts as a forum, which is very nice. And also in 2004, Retro Cars magazine have their first show. So A&S Publishing, that was publishing Retro Cars at the time, also had an events division, and they did shows. And the Retro Car show was at Santapod, I think in July. And so we hadn't been a forum for very long at that point, but we'd got some friends and stuff. So the first Retro Car show, we had 6 cars. By the time the third Retro Car show rolled around, we had over 100 cars on our stand. And that was the point at which I thought, you know what, I could do a show. Like Retro Rides could do a show. And it wasn't with the intention of not going to Retro Car Show anymore. It was with the intention of doing our own thing and doing other events. And it always has been. So at that point, I could have done one of two things. So I could have gone, hey, I've got these 100 or so people that like to come to events. Let's just have a camping weekend somewhere, because that was like the idea, was to have a little bit of a sort of campy thing going on. And we'll go to something, and we'll do something nice as a Retro Rides event. Or I could go big. I could go really big with the idea of rivaling these huge events. So guess which I did. I knew I couldn't do an event on my own. So, because whilst I was fairly naive, and we will see quite how naive soon, I was also aware that events are hard work and require a lot of organisation. So I looked for some people to work with. I spoke to a number of people. As I was speaking to people, I kind of was going a little bit off the idea of doing a big event. It seemed to spiral out of control. So I started to back away from the idea, and then suddenly, somewhere along the line, I genuinely can't remember how it happened, I ended up talking to Keith, and Keith is the other half of the Retro Rides events. Still, he is the guy that does sort of the other bit, but he kind of came along and was like, yeah, no, I'll help out. We can do this. We'll make it happen. So between us, we decided that this was going to be a thing we did. So inspired by the retro show, because we very much enjoyed that, we thought we'd take a similar format as what we started out as, but with corners. So drag racing's fine, very exciting, but really I was brought up on circuit racing and stuff like that, so I wanted something with corners, and we wanted a Midland location. So when we originally started looking, the very first choice, ironically, was Goodwood. And bear in mind, this is 2007, so it wasn't as huge and well known as it is now. It was doing the Festival of Speed and I think the Revival at the time, but they were much smaller events than they are now. So its international acclaim was not what it is now. But the decision not to use that came from the fact it's too far south. So our thinking was that geographically it was going to end up important, so we ended up dismissing Goodwood, which was originally our first choice, and then dismissing Lyddon because it was much further south, although it does have the advantage of being near Dover, so you might get some international crowd. We dismissed Brands Hatch because it was too expensive, and we were a little bit scared of some of its corporatiness, because we didn't know what we were doing, so we were a little bit worried about that. Dismissed Coombe because it was too flat for us. And then we settled on sort of Mallory Park as a place to go and investigate because none of us had been there, and it seemed to be the interesting mix of being in the Midlands, it being a bowl, and we looked at it and decided we could run a point-to-point sprint. So the point-to-point sprint was hugely important to us. We'd been to track day events. There were events that are not dissimilar to this, with a mix of cars going around a track. Like, that is not a new invention. It's a show with a mix of old and new cars with a load of track action. Is just a thing that people have been doing for years. So we're not inventing anything new, so we wanted kind of to make sure what we were doing was compelling and slightly different to that. So what we did was we mixed that with the ideas of the retro show, which is run what you brung point to point. So point to point, effectively drag racing, with corners, which is a sprint. We really quickly worked out. So you'd constantly get new and interesting cars going past rather than the same 8 cars for half an hour or whatever it is. And that worked out great. That was one of the best decisions we've ever made. But we had to go to a circuit that was running as a normal circuit and say, we want to do this point-to-point sprint at your circuit. And we were a little bit nervous about whether anyone was going to say it would be okay, let alone our effective first choice that we actually went to speak to, which was Mallory. But we went there, we spoke to them, they said, yeah, that's no problem. Fantastic, happy days. So then we worked out the rest of the event. So we decided we wanted to do a 2-day. And then, because we wanted to do it in August, so we'd I think Tash, Keith's girlfriend at the time, worked out that the hottest day of the year, or the driest day of the year, one of the two, was I think the 11th of August or something like that. So we were like, right, that's the day we're going to be on, okay? That's the weekend we're going to be on. And then we found Mallory Park have things on the Sunday all summer. Like that's the way motorsport works, is it generally runs on a Sunday. So we're like, okay, well let's be opposite. Let's be adjacent to one of those. And luckily for us, the thing that was on the same weekend was the VSCC, Vintage Sports Car Club. And I adore the Vintage Sports Car Club. They are absolutely hugely entertaining. They're awesome cars. They're interesting to look at. They're a really interesting bunch of guys and girls. And it was like, that's perfect. That's a perfect fit. So those guys were happy with us coming along because we get to introduce a bunch of people to the VSCC stuff. We get our Saturday to run what you brung. We do camping Friday, Saturday night. Sunday, everyone goes home. And then we have our club displays Saturday and Sunday, retro parking Saturday and Sunday, traders, all of that kind of stuff. So it was all good. So we had these flyers made up, and the cars on the front are a copy of Japanese car show posters with the illustrations, and that was something I picked up the year before, having visited Japan to go to car shows. That's 2006, folks. On the back we have From What You Brung, Style Sprint, Vintage Sports Car Club. The most special of guests and invited cars, which is true. Enormous Trade Village, which was not true in the end. Exhilarating activated soapbox derby, which we'll get onto. There's a rolling road, which we did have, a cars for sale area, which I think existed. For reasons that will become clear in a minute, my memories are quite hazy. An off-road radio-controlled car track, which I think was there, maybe just a bit of dirt around the back, who knows. A licensed bar and marquee, which we had, motorsport footage, which we had, and much more. So not mentioned there is the fact that we got club stands and retro parking. So that's an interesting oversight. On the back, we have the hill climb Imp. We got hot rods. Got Red Victor 1. Got some VSCC, Escort, Beetle. Lovely spread of what we do. The cars in the middle. Nightmares Racing Mark III Cortina. Mitsubishi Sapporo and a BMW 2002. So the full spread of cars that we were kind of interested in. I did notice when I looked at this earlier that the advance tickets were £1 cheaper than the on the gate tickets, which seems a bit rubbish. But there we go. That was an insane thing to do. So yeah, that was great. That was our promotion for it. We did some adverts in magazines and we hooked up with some people. I think we got magazine sponsorship from Practical Classics, Performance VW, and Retro Ford magazine. So that was the start of it all. It lined up pretty nicely. It's got the makings of a brilliant event, and it's worth pointing out at this point that we didn't know what we were doing. We had no clue. The team of people organising it had got a little bit bigger at this point, but there was no one in it that had ever organised an event before. We genuinely didn't know what we were doing at all. But we figured we'd been to car shows. We could put on a car show, right? So the guest cars were super important to us. It seemed like the thing to do would be to get great guests in order to attract people in that may not have heard about Retro Rides. So at the time, Retro Rides felt like it was a reasonable size to do a show like this. But it felt like we needed some more pull. We needed to pull some more people in. So the guest car lineup was pretty sweet. We had Frank Eriksson coming over from Sweden with his Volvo Amazon. So if you haven't seen Frank Eriksson's Volvo Amazon, it is an incredible bit of kit. It is, and bear in mind, this is, I mean, he built it, I think, about 3 years before this, but this is 2007. It's on Air Ride, like on its sills on Air Ride. It's chopped, it's channeled, it's a full house custom. So Swedish people build incredibly detailed, incredibly high quality customs. And this was the kind of the pinnacle of that kind of scene. It was, but it was also very usable. He drove it over from Sweden. It's unbelievable. It's a Volvo 2-litre turbocharged T5 type engine in it. The interior was all custom. It had built-in PlayStations, and but it was all smooth and all just big shiny wheels. It was just a phenomenal bit of kit. And the other guest car was Matthias Vox with the Vox Amazon, the only Amazon in the world better than Frank Eriksson's, and possibly my favourite car ever to have been built. It is just, to me, the epitome of everything that I would desire to have in a car. It's an unbelievable bit of kit. And I was so excited that it was coming to the show. Alongside that, we had Red Victor 1, who at the time was the quickest street legal car in the world. We had the Hill Climb Imp, which was on the flyer. We got John Beardmore's Minor, which was probably one of the best built cars in the UK at the time and quite noteworthy. We had a chap called Declan with his Drift Soarer. Like this again, 2007. So drifting was like a thing, but it wasn't as big as it became. So we were trying to introduce people to that kind of idea. And then we had Alan Thomas with his Nissan KPG C10 GTR. This was, at the time, the only KPG C10 outside of Japan. And it's the only genuine GTR for many years afterwards as well. It is unbelievable to me that this came to our first show. It is an incredible bit of kit. Again, bearing in mind this is 2007, before all the cool kids got into their Japanese cars and realised it was amazing. This is what we were doing. We were there already. We were pulling in these rare cars, and it was that to me was one of my highlights of the weekend. So we had a big marquee with a screen. We got all of it sorted. So, bearing in mind we didn't know what we were doing, what actually happened with the event? We arrived on the Friday. So nowadays when we organise an event, so we organise a one-day event at Chelsea Walsh on the Sunday. We arrive on the Thursday and start setting up, pretty much. So we arrived on the Friday, our first event, when it was basically about to get ready. I think Keith may have gone up Thursday evening, or he was up there before me, one of the two. Somebody had to have been around for the marquee to be placed in the right spot. But we basically started setting up on Friday. We had no idea how large the club stands should be. We had no measuring devices or any of that kind of stuff. And it hadn't really occurred to anyone to think that through. So we eventually measured the club stands out by walking the width of a car, which I think we worked out as 3 meters, and then walking enough length to say this is a club stand. And then we'd put the club stand sign in the middle of it. Now, theoretically, we were going to use stakes because when we'd gone there, we were like, oh yes, this dusty, muddy area, we can use that. But we hadn't realised that the dusty, muddy area was actually on top of the asphalt car park. So we couldn't put stakes in the ground, so we ended up using bits of paper taped to bollards in the middle of where we thought the club stand would be, which is just an insane thing to do. Because of the way the bollards were put out, overnight on Friday there was a bit of wind, a bit of breeze, and some of the signs had blown off and some of the bollards had moved around. There wasn't really a map of where anybody's club was. I think possibly I drew one on the spot. This is up until recently had been a recurring theme of me not having a map of the club stands until I've laid them out. It's an appalling oversight for many years. But this was the first time I did it, and it was probably the worst time I did it. It was nearly 9 p.m. By the time we realised that we'd said we were going to do a barbecue for everybody on the campsite, and we didn't have a barbecue or anything to put on it. So we sent one of the helpers out to go and do all that stuff whilst we were putting the club stands up in the dark. They come back, do the barbecue, people descend over the hill from the campsite. That turned out really nice. That was a really good thing to do. It was a lovely social event. So my plan then was to get all this done, sort of about 10:30, 11ish, head back to the hotel, still not camping, and get some reasonable amount of sleep. I knew I was going to be up early the following morning, and I hadn't slept well the night before because I was worrying about doing the show. That was the plan. I got back to the hotel. The hotel had Frank Erickson and Alan Thomas with the Nissan, and we stayed up until about 4 o'clock talking outside the hotel. So I got about 2 hours sleep before I got up and then ran my very first car show. And there were literally thousands of people turned up on the Saturday. I can't express to you how busy it was. It was an unbelievable thing. I thought this was kind of how car shows were because I've been to other busy car shows. It didn't click until later that it was ridiculously busy. And the reason it was possibly ridiculously busy is because we were featured in the Guardian weekend section that week. I have no idea how it happened, but somebody called me up from the Guardian and said, "You're doing this event at Mallory Park. Can we feature in the section? Can you give us some words and a picture?" So that's what I did, and we ended up in the Guardian weekend section. So we had a whole load of people there coming to look at our shonky old cars running around the track. It was great though. It was all proper retro ride stuff. There were clubs all over the place. There was Fords, Vauxhalls. There was VW stuff. There was things going around the track. We got the Japanese cars. We had like rotary Mazdas. We had Toyotas. We had Fiat, Lancia, hot rods, street cars, standard cars, stuff built for drifting. All of it. And on the track was the same. It was just the whole gamut of what we're about. It was just brilliant from that point of view. There was a television crew there filming something. I can't even remember what, but they took over a space as well. So some of our cars ended up featured on their show way back then. So that was pretty sweet. We thought that was a good idea. Just another complication to add to things. The club situation sorted itself out. Some of the club stands were a bit too small, some of them were a bit too big, but I think everyone was kind of happy to be there. Where events go wrong really is when they are things are badly organised and they're going badly and people aren't having a good time. If you have a nice sunny day and things are well enough organised that people can kind of accommodate the disorganisation, people will just get on with it. So we got away with that. We were very lucky with people being good to us. So I was running around like a mad thing. There was all sorts of stuff going on. So whilst the show itself was great, there was just kind of troubleshooting everywhere. There was the screen stuff needed to be set up. There was the club stands to move, obviously, and there was the gate stuff to organise, like things we just hadn't really considered, like guiding cars to places. We had like helpers and all that kind of stuff. We hadn't really thought about it. We'd never done a show before. We thought, oh, people turn up and then you go to where your club is. Someone has to tell you to do that. And I hadn't got enough time to sort out the awards, so Frank Eriksson did that. He did a great job of that. That was superb. Matthias Fox was stuck in Denmark, so I got a email, I think, or a telephone call from Matthias that he'd missed his ferry and he wasn't going to be there. And I got a photograph of him at the docks in Denmark. I was probably too tired to be distraught by that, but ultimately it's one of the most disappointing things that's ever happened to me with any of our shows, and it to this day bothers me, but it's one of those things. The soapbox race at the end of the day had 2 people in it, and one of which I think broke as they went off the start line. People arrived with dogs, which we hadn't even considered people might do. But you know, it's our first show, and we had unanticipated chaos, but we dealt with it. And then it was over. Like we did the soapbox, and it ran, and that was kind of the end of the show for the day. So people headed back to the campsite. We didn't really have evening entertainment, I don't think, or I can't remember doing the evening entertainment if we did. And I don't really remember a whole lot of the show. And I don't really remember when I went back to the hotel or anything. I remember going out for fish and chips really late with Alan Thomas again. And then I got about 3 hours sleep, and then I had to do the Sunday. Oh man. So we figured the Sunday would be easier. Like the VSCC were running the track, they were running the entrances. The only thing we really had to worry about was the retro parking area and the club displays and the stuff we had going on in the marquee. Oh, should be simple, right? Nope. So the idea was to introduce people to the VSCC, and people came away loving it. Like they hadn't seen these cars running like this. Like they didn't understand that they get thrashed hard. They get raced properly. They're a great spectacle. And we achieved that. I'm really pleased with that. The show happened from our point of view. Again, I don't really remember much of the Sunday. I remember at one point I found Keith sat in a chair behind the marquee, and apparently he'd been there for about 6 or 7 hours, just unable to move. So yeah, we it was hot as well, so we were all dehydrated. It was a tough old weekend, but we did it. We completed this weekend, and if you ask people that were there, it was a fantastic show. So they may well not have realised how utterly chaotic it was, or they may have realised and just went with it and enjoyed the show regardless. But we have a few people that say it's still the best show we've ever done, which is kind of almost insulting. From our point of view, actually, it's only in recent years that we started to get as big again. I think that for a few years, we've had a lot more cars at our event, but like the actual grand scale of them haven't quite reached the insanity of the Retro Rise show in 2007. But it's still the same thing. It's like what we've always been doing. It's a diverse range of cars. It's not just one make. It's not just a VW show, or it's not just a Ford show. It's like really the broad brush. It's action, action, action. We've never done static shows. we'll come on to that. We'd never really done static shows as our main aim, and it was the blueprint for everything that came since. So we've kind of been chasing it ever since, and I think about sort of 3 or 4 years ago, we started to hit it again with the gathering. Like once we moved to Shelsley and got our rhythm there, the kind of guest cards we were getting and the size of the show, it started to match. And obviously now doing the Weekender, it's close. That's the closest thing we've done to this for 11 years. So it's pretty neat. It's pretty nice that we kind of got the idea right first time, and then we've been playing catch up with ourselves, and that's pretty sweet. So that will be the question of why didn't we do it again? So this gets a little bit complicated, and this is all water under the bridge. As I say, it was 11 years ago. So I'm hoping there's no animosity anywhere, although most of the people involved with it, I don't think, work anywhere near Mallory anymore because it shut down and went out of business. But we had an arrangement. So the idea was on the... Let's preface this by saying hiring circuits to do events is not cheap. The Saturday was 100% us, so everybody through the door is Retro Rides money because they're there for Retro Rides. The Sunday, because we were partnering up with VSCC, we said to them, how many people do you usually get there? Oh, about 1,500. So we said, right, if you keep your 1,500, and then after 1,500, we'll 50-50 split the remainder. Brilliant. They were happy with that. We were happy with that. So when it came to the end of the event, or like the week after the event, we spoke to Mallory, who had managed to gate for us, and we had asked them the numbers on the various days, and I think they said we had 1,500 on the Saturday, and there were 1,400 people through the gate on the Sunday. They had told VSCC there were 3,500 people through the gate on the Sunday. Now, we had no way of proving this. Somebody somewhere is lying, so they could be lying to the VSCC, and it could be 1,500, or they could be lying to us, and it's 3,500. No matter what, the upshot of it is that we go from a situation, if there's 3,500, where we make a good profit and we can do it again the following year, to a situation where we don't make any money and we're basically out of business. And that's what happened. And I think there are reasons for them to do that that I'm not going to go into, but I was not surprised to see other events running there the following year, shall we say. And it galled me at the time, and now it's business. And I don't know if those two things are related. I don't know if it's somebody just being opportunistic, or whether or not somebody had said something to someone to say, look, we'll come and do this. It's an intriguing thought, but to be honest, it's years ago, and everybody's moved on by a long way. I was in my 30s, which I'm not anymore. So that was kind of the death knell of that whole thing. Like we couldn't carry on. Like the organising team as was, just we were absolutely burnt out by doing it. We were flat broke. We were in a situation where we were completely cynical and leery of doing anything more, doing other events, being involved with other organisations, other venues. We just thought, you know what, let's not bother. And that was that. So we decided, let's all part ways, let's wind this whole thing up. This is all just a massive disaster, let's never do it again. Matthias Vox only got half of what he expected to get, so my aim was, because he got to Denmark, I planned to send him the rest of the money once all the profit had come in. Anyway, because he'd made the attempt, it wasn't like he didn't bother. I was going to send him like another third or whatever, but we had no money, so he ended up out of pocket, which apparently was pretty disastrous for him for a year or so. And to this day, I am hugely ashamed that happened. It's even more frustrating that if he'd managed to make the event, he wouldn't have been, because we could have paid him in the cash from the day, which is how we paid Frank. So I've tried to straighten that out a little bit, but it's like years too late. Like it wasn't the time to do it, but I did what I could. So fast forward 6 months, we got all that hanging over us. It's all gone sort of disastrous, but time has a weird way with you. So 6 months after the event, people are like, "Oh, when are you going to do another event? When are you going to do it?" People didn't necessarily, people like, for years, people didn't know how much of a disaster that event really was for us. And then I kind of still wanted to do events. Like enough time had passed that I'd forgotten what a pain it was and how stressful it was. But not completely. So what I ended up doing, I got back in touch with Keith and we said, let's never do that again. Let's never do an event that big again for a first event. And then we decided that what we should do is meet for about, 200 or so cars in a car park, a motor museum. Which is probably what we should have done in the first place. So we went off to Gaydon and we did 200 cars in the car park there, and we enjoyed it. It was nice and relaxing. It was basically just a big group of friends with some cool cars there. We still got some guest cars came down. We parked them outside Gaydon, and we had a really good day actually. It was just a nice weekend all around. I camped, and then we thought, I know what we'll do. We'll go from Gaydon and then we'll go and do Haynes. And then like a bit of our brain was like, and then we can do Bewley. And then we can just move around these museums each year. And that might be quite fun. We'll find a way to expand or whatever. And then we went to Haynes and they had a track. And we remembered, oh yes, that's the thing that was missing at Gaydon. We have to have a track. Wherever we go, we have to have track action. It was nice to do a static event. But it was so... There was no challenge there, really. I mean, there was a challenge in so much as trying to do an event that didn't kill us, and it was nice. But it's not retro rides. It needs a bit of action. It needed something. So we had a track at Haynes, and that was it. That's our set. And from then on out, it's the blueprint was made at Mallory Park, and it is now the Gathering and the Weekender follow that blueprint pretty much. So there you go, that was the Retro Ride show in 2007. You probably weren't there, although some people watching this may well have been, and fair play for you if you stuck with us for this long, both in terms of the length of this video and in terms of coming to our shows and being involved with Retro Rides. We are always thankful for people still being involved after, whatever it is, 13 years of doing this madness. And we continue to strive to never repeat that experience, but also to put on exciting shows that people want to come to. The next is Retro Rides Gathering on the 19th of August at Shelsley Walsh, and we may well be back to having some interesting international guests this year, which will be announced in due course. So yeah. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe and all of that kind of thing. I will be doing these more often. I now have a little studio thing. So, yeah. See you soon.